Early June 1944. Berlin. Inside the Reich Chancellery, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and anxiety. Telephones rang, stopped, rang again. Officers walked in and out carrying folders stamped "Top Secret," their faces tight, their voices low. At the center of it all sat Adolf Hitler. He was not looking at France. He was looking at a single name: George S. Patton. A German intelligence officer stood before him, stiff-backed, reading from a report. Radio intercepts confirm continued high-volume traffic from the 1st United States Army Group, mein Führer. The formation remains positioned opposite Calais. Movement of armored units has been detected. Patton is present. Hitler's fingers tightened around the edge of the table. Patton. The Americans had many generals, but only one of them had become a ghost in the German mind. Patton was not careful. He was not slow. He did not wait. In North Africa, his arrival had turned defeat into something dangerous. In Sicily, he had outrun German retreats and cut off escape routes. Every time he appeared, fronts didn't bend, they broke. That was why Hitler feared him. Not Eisenhower, who talked in committees. Not Montgomery, who moved at a snail's pace. Patton moved like a knife. Calais, Hitler said quietly, tracing a finger along the French coast. That is where he will strike. The German generals did not argue. They had been watching the same reports. Patton was visible in England. His headquarters were noisy. His radios were busy. His army was large. Too large to be ignored. In a quiet room elsewhere in Germany, Field Marshal von Rundstedt studied a wall map. Normandy in blue, Calais in red. Red meant danger. "We know Patton," Rundstedt muttered. "He does not waste time on sideshows. He strikes where it hurts." And that was the trap. Because while the Germans watched Patton, the real invasion was forming somewhere else, across the Channel. Allied troops boarded landing craft in the dark. Engines rumbled. Boots splashed in cold water. Men gripped rifles and prayed. None of them were Patton's. But the Germans didn't know that. In southern England, George S. Patton stood in front of a mirror, adjusting his uniform. He was not going to Normandy. He was not going anywhere near it. Instead, he was about to perform the strangest role of his career. He would become bait. Outside, inflatable tanks sat in open fields. Fake radios tapped endless messages. Wooden aircraft waited on airstrips. An army built for one purpose: to be seen. Because the Germans didn't believe in rubber tanks. They believed in Patton. Back in Berlin, Hitler listened to another report. Reconnaissance confirms significant Allied buildup opposite Calais. The 1st U.S. Army Group appears to be preparing for a major operation. Hitler smiled faintly. They think we are fools. They think we cannot see what they are doing. He looked at the map. Calais, the shortest crossing, the strongest defenses, the obvious target. Patton will come there. And when he does, we will destroy him. German panzer divisions waited behind Calais, fueled, armed, ready. Waiting for a general who wasn't coming. And far to the southwest, beyond the reach of Hitler's fear, a different army was already moving. Normandy was about to explode. But the man Germany feared most was standing in front of a mirror, playing a role. Hitler had built his career on one simple rule: find the enemy's strongest point and destroy it. That rule had shattered Poland. It had collapsed France. It had nearly broken the Soviet Union. And now, in the summer of 1944, Hitler believed he saw the same pattern again. Across the English Channel, the Allies were massing for invasion. But to Hitler, not all Allied generals were equal. Montgomery was slow, predictable, a man who planned forever and moved cautiously. Eisenhower was worse, a politician in uniform, a man who tried to make everyone happy. But Patton was dangerous. German intelligence files on George S. Patton were thick. They described him as impulsive, aggressive, reckless, but also devastatingly effective. He did not grind. He did not probe. He lunged. In North Africa, he had turned defeat into momentum. In Sicily, he had outrun German withdrawals and taken cities before anyone else believed it was possible. Patton did not fight wars. He collapsed them. So when German spies reported that Patton was commanding something called the 1st United States Army Group in England, Hitler's instincts locked in. "This is it," he told his generals. "This is where they intend to win the war." Calais, the narrowest point of the Channel, the fastest route to Germany, the most direct path to the Ruhr industrial heartland. Everything pointed there. And Patton was there. Hitler's mind did the rest. Normandy must be a distraction, a feint, a sacrifice, to draw German forces away before Patton struck at Calais with the real blow. Rommel, commanding German defenses in France, was uneasy. He knew the coast was vulnerable everywhere. But even Rommel respected Patton. He had seen American forces change under Patton's command. He had watched how fast they adapted, how violently they moved once unleashed. Rommel did not believe the Americans would waste Patton on a secondary operation. "Wherever Patton is," he told his staff, "that is where the main attack will come." The belief spread through German headquarters, through intelligence offices, through Hitler's own thoughts. And belief became doctrine. Panzer divisions were held back near Calais. The best armor in the German army, the formations that could smash an invasion back into the sea, waited there, engines cold, guns silent, eyes fixed on the horizon. They were not sent to Normandy. They were being saved for Patton. June 6, 1944. The first reports arrived before dawn. Enemy landings in Normandy. Hitler was not alarmed. Normandy was not Calais. He ordered no immediate counterattack. "This is the diversion," he said. "They are trying to draw us south." German commanders on the ground begged for permission to move. They could see Allied troops pouring ashore. They could see the beachheads forming. They could feel the window closing. But Hitler refused. "Patton has not moved," he insisted. "The real attack is still coming." Every hour the Panzer divisions waited was an hour the Normandy landings grew stronger. Every hesitation gave the Allies more time to unload men, tanks, and artillery. But Hitler was trapped inside his belief. The most dangerous general in the world was waiting at Calais, and Hitler was determined not to fall for the trick. He was waiting for Patton, and while he waited, Normandy was becoming something far more dangerous than a diversion. June 7th, 1944. Normandy was burning. American and British troops were still fighting for their lives on the beaches and in the hedgerows beyond them. German artillery pounded landing zones. Snipers hunted medics. Tanks rolled toward the coast. This was the moment when invasions usually died. This was the moment when Germany should have crushed it. But the crushing blow never came, because Germany's best armies were still staring across the Channel at nothing. Inside German headquarters at Calais, panzer commanders waited. They did not doubt the reports from Normandy. They doubted their meaning. This was not Patton. This was too sloppy, too chaotic, too costly. Patton did not land like this. Patton smashed. So they waited. Back in England, Patton was performing the role of his life. He inspected fake troops. He toured rubber tank parks. He appeared in public. He let himself be seen. German reconnaissance planes photographed everything. Patton smiled. He knew what they were seeing, and he knew what they were believing. Across the Channel, Allied forces fought and bled for every mile inland. Eisenhower needed time. Time to unload tanks. Time to bring in artillery. Time to build airfields. Time to turn a fragile beachhead into an army. He was not fighting German divisions. He was fighting German hesitation. Every day Hitler waited for Patton was a day the invasion survived. By June 10th, the Germans could no longer ignore what was happening. Normandy was not collapsing. It was expanding. Rommel demanded action. "We must counterattack now," he warned, "before the enemy brings in more armor." Hitler refused. Patton was still in England. The first U.S. Army group was still sending radio messages. Calais was still quiet. "This is their deception," Hitler insisted. "They are trying to make us move too soon." And so the panzers stayed where they were. Days passed. Allied aircraft dominated the skies. Supplies poured into Normandy. More troops arrived every hour. The beachheads began to merge. The invasion was no longer fragile. It was becoming unstoppable. German officers began to whisper something dangerous. What if Patton isn't coming? The thought felt almost blasphemous. Patton had to be coming. He always did. But the maps were changing. Normandy was no longer a pinprick. It was a front. And the longer Hitler waited, the worse it became. Behind the scenes, Allied deception specialists watched German radio traffic. They knew the Germans were still waiting. They knew the lie was holding. The army Hitler feared most did not exist. And yet, it was winning the war. Mid-June 1944. In a concrete bunker in France, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel stared at a map that no longer made sense. Normandy was still there, still growing, still alive. The invasion that should have been crushed in days was turning into something permanent. Rommel had commanded defenses before. He knew how this was supposed to look. A beachhead appears, A counterattack smashes it. The survivors are driven back into the sea. That was how Germany had always fought. But this time, the counterattack never came. Because the reserves were in the wrong place. Because Hitler was still waiting for Patton. Rommel had warned him. He had said Normandy was real. He had said the enemy was pouring through. He had said the window was closing. Hitler ignored him. Patton will strike at Calais. This is only the first wave. Rommel looked at the casualty lists, at the destroyed batteries, at the crumbling coastal defenses. This was not a diversion. This was the war. On June 17th, German reconnaissance finally delivered something terrifying. No major forces across from Calais, no tank parks, no troop concentrations, no invasion buildup. Just empty fields. The ghost army Patton was supposed to be leading was not there. Rommel felt something sink in his chest. Not anger. The cold clarity of being outplayed. Hitler had not been cautious. He had been tricked. And the trick had cost Germany the war. When Rommel confronted him, Hitler exploded. They will still attack. Patton will still come. Rommel said nothing. He didn't need to. The truth was already screaming from the map. The Allies were now too strong in Normandy. They had tanks, they had airfields, they had supply lines, they had momentum. Even if Patton landed at Calais tomorrow, it would no longer matter. Germany had missed its chance, and Rommel knew exactly why. Not because of Allied strength, not because of German weakness, because Hitler had been afraid of a man who wasn't there. The Führer had gambled the Reich on one belief, that Patton would lead the real attack, and that belief had just collapsed. In quiet rooms, German officers began to whisper, "We waited for a ghost. We were fighting shadows. We lost the war to a phantom army." Rommel sat alone that night, staring at the Channel. He had faced armies. He had faced impossible odds. But he had never faced this. A war decided not by bullets, but by belief. Patton never fired a shot in Normandy, and yet his shadow had held back the most powerful armored force Germany possessed. Rommel wrote one final line in his journal. Not dramatic, not emotional, just devastating. We have been defeated by deception more than force. By the time Patton finally crossed the Channel, it was already over. Not the fighting, the decision. In late July 1944, his Third Army tore into France exactly the way German commanders had always feared. Fast, relentless, unstoppable. But this was not the moment that broke Germany. That moment had come weeks earlier. While Patton had been standing on the English coast, Hitler had been staring at empty beaches. Calais, rubber tanks, fake radio traffic, an army that existed only because Hitler believed it had to. Rommel had tried to warn them. The war would not be decided by where Patton landed. It would be decided by where he wasn't. By the time Patton's real tanks rolled through France, there was no line left to stop them. The reserves had waited. The panzers had waited. Germany had waited. For a ghost. Rommel would never see the end of the war. But in his private notes, he wrote the truth before anyone else dared to admit it. We have been defeated more by deception than by force. The Allies did not win Normandy because they were stronger. They won because Hitler was afraid. Afraid of one man. Afraid of one army. Afraid of a threat that was never real. And while he watched the wrong coast, the real war slipped past him.